Well, let me start also agreeing that today climate is perhaps the driving force in the political agenda, and we have seen this in many statements by the Commission. We have seen this also in the European Parliament and the new forces in the European Parliament and the interest. And against this background, the EIB, I think we need to be seen as an instrument to help in the decarbonization efforts of member states and the private sector in Europe. And in fact, climate, we are the EU bank, the bank of member states, and we are policy driven. So this is why it is our role is important to help in this ambition and in this commitment that Europe has. And in this regard, well, we have seen more and more calls on us to do more. Last June, the European Council requested us to increase our financing on climate action. In fact, we have been for many years at the forefront of efforts to combat climate change. Our institution is the largest provider of financing, multilateral financing for climate projects. We are one of the largest multilateral development banks, and we are the one who finance more climate projects. And since, just to give an example of the importance of our climate work, since 2012, we have provided 150 billion euros to climate projects around the world, especially in Europe, but also in other countries. And with those requests, with those increasing requests, and with the attention paid to the climate emergency that we are seeing, the bank started to work in a plan to increase our climate ambition. And this plan has, I would say, 4 pillars. The first is a commitment to support more climate and environment investments. We know, because that investment needs to decarbonize the economy are huge, and we know that according to all the assessments, we need to move from billions to trillions. So we decided that we will aim, the group, the EIB group, which is our bank and also our subsidiary, the European Investment Fund, will aim to support 1 trillion euro investments in climate and environment in the next decade. And we believe that this figure, while ambitious, is feasible, because if we take into account only our financing, the bank financing on climate in the period that I mentioned, those since 2012, we mobilized 550 billion euros in investments on climate. So we think that this is realistic. The second pillar is an increase in our financing, the bank financing to climate and environment. We currently have a target of 25% of our bank financing to climate, but we will increase this target to 50% climate and environment, because currently in the discussion of the InvestEU, we talk about sustainable finance and climate and environment, not only climate. So we will achieve 50% gradually by 2025. And we are currently at 30%, and we think that this is also feasible, although it will be a challenge to get there, but the needs are there, so we will try to support those needs. The third pillar is that we are aware that in the current context and to fight climate change, we do not only need to do a lot of climate financing as we are doing, but we also need to ensure that the rest of our financing does not harm what we are doing. So we decided we are committed to be aligned with the principles and goals of the Paris Agreement, all our financing, by the end of 2020. And this Paris alignment commitment is also a commitment that all multilateral development banks have, and we are working together on a common approach, although as a European institution, we will have our standards that could be even higher. And the fourth pillar, which is very important, is that, and is also a European, I would say, a priority, is that we know that this is a transition that could be complex, so some regions will be more affected, and we need to ensure that those that are going to bear more cost should be helped in the transition. So we will also be an instrument to support those regions. In fact, we are already an important tool for cohesion in Europe. We devote 30% of our financing to cohesion. So we will also help in the just transition, and we are also waiting for the Commission to release the proposal for a just transition fund.
So as a consequence of that, do you think this region, Central and Eastern Europe, with your increasing focus on climate funding and just transition as a part of that, can this region expect more support from the EIB in future?
We are not a quota-driven institution.
But as a consequence of this refocusing,
the needs are there, and we will help, and we will engage with the region to support them and to help them in the transition. And so I think that if the private sector and the governments working plans, we will help them in the decarbonization, and we will work together with them to help them in this process.
And then a question around, the third pillar you mentioned, so in future all your lending will be Paris compatible, Paris aligned. Nonetheless, as you say, there is a transition period. What does it mean? I'm thinking also of the energy lending review for a fuel such as gas, for example, which is better than coal, can be part of the transition, but ultimately is obviously still a fossil fuel. I think in the draft proposal for the new energy lending criteria, you basically say we will end all funding to fossil fuel projects by the end of 2020. What scope do you see still for gas as a transition fuel, and how quickly does it need to decarbonize to continue benefiting from your help?
Well, two comments on that. First, the Paris alignment approach is still being developed, and we are with other multilateral development banks. We are working together with them, although we are also working to see how we can ourselves ensure that we comply with those principles. And this is still work in progress. Our commitment is to 2020. One of the pieces would be the energy lending policy. We presented a proposal this summer, but this is still being discussed by member states. And it is true that natural gas is one of the controversial issues in this proposal. In the proposal, what we proposed the member states is to phase out energy projects depending on fossil fuels, especially those that do not meet certain technical requirements on emissions, the level of emissions, by the end of 2020. And does this mean that we will not finance natural gas? No, we will continue to finance natural gas, provided that they met some efficiency and sustainability criteria, and in the average life of a project. So I think that the idea that we have is that we also need to help all these technologies to develop and incorporate more renewable energies on the way. Because I think that even if we recognize that natural gas is a source of energy for the transition, we also think that we need to have a longer term focus and help them also to decarbonize further. So I think that was the approach. This is still not approved. This is still being discussed by member states. At the end, it will be their decision.
And just one last question. The next meeting to discuss this is on next week, 15th of October. Are we likely to see a decision then?
Well, I cannot say. I hope that we will have a decision. That I hope that we can be there. But in any case, I think that we are moving in the right direction. I think that, as you said at the beginning, the commitment to neutrality, carbon neutrality by 2050 is possibly being adopted by member states before the end of the year. And if you want to implement that commitment, you will need changes. And the EIB is ready to support member states and the private sector, governments, to make this possible.
Okay. Let's turn to Mr. Sabo.
Bad guy.
So you represent a business that is the bad guy, that's actually here in the region, that is having to cope with all of these, ideally find support in all of these developments. So your world is changing, is going to change more. So I guess you will probably want to tell us the risks and the challenges you see, but even more so, is there a way to turn this into an opportunity for you as an oil and gas company?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So I'm the bad guy representing the oil business, so a dying business, dinosaur. So I'm rather negative or pessimistic as the CEO of the company whose core business is the oil business. Today in the morning I have received a text message from my daughter who wrote that, "Papa, you are going to have a panel with 4 women, yeah? And what kind of great situation it is." So she was very happy about that. And I just realized that what we achieved in development of the society, yeah? So 10, 15 years ago, we would not have imagined to have this kind of panel, yeah? Discussing the future. 4 ladies, 1 guy, 1 man. So I really believe that there are positive sparks. Yeah, so being negative, but I really believe that how we solve, for example, this is situation or issue of diversity. So I really hope that we will solve the situation about the carbon neutrality. Yeah, so whether I see an opportunity, of course I see. So not just the oil business, but other energy-intensive businesses are trying to cope with the new situation. So of course that they are launching new projects to achieve higher energy efficiency. So this is the first one, and I think that there could be a great cooperation with the EIB to finance those projects. So this is the first one. The second one, they are trying to diversify their business. So we are doing the very same. So for example, we are in sharing economy. We are in circular economy, which I mentioned yesterday, so a few examples. So for example, we are keen to pursue the biofuel, so the second generation of biofuel, and to switch from the consumption economy to the circular economy, so to switch from the produce, consume, waste cycle to reuse the waste. So this is the 2G bio, which is made of the waste. And there is the recycling of the plastics. We acquired 2 companies in Germany, which are really professionals in that plastic recycling. The issue is, within the sharing economy, the circular economy, that there is no business case. Yeah? So we are trying to diversify, but we do not see any return on that. So this is one issue we are tackling heavily. Then, just to mention another example of whether there is an opportunity, so we are having our company 1,900 service stations throughout Central and Eastern Europe, and we became the largest coffee shop company, selling 50 million cups of coffee, actually. Yeah? So 5 years ago, I would not have imagined that we discussed coffee at our meetings. So yeah, this is the situation. Of course, challenges. There are the political challenges I see. So security of supply, okay, we can cut the oil business in Europe, and what is the next move? So all the fossil fuel, I assume, will be supplied from abroad, Middle East, Russia, South America, so we won't save the issue, the climate change issue. We will cut jobs, and we are speaking in this region about 100,000 of people, so this is going to be a political issue as well. And what I learned just yesterday when we had the morning discussion with the EIB, I learned that there are few countries who are not really the best team players within the European Union. So pushing them to the corner, I mean, will even generate more kind of exit strategies from the European Union. So this is what we want to achieve. So I mean, there are plenty of challenges, I think, which are not taken into consideration. Yeah, then, of course, and what I see, and this is a driver which I think is missing from the whole thinking, is that we are about to punish the industry. But not the oil businesses generating the emissions, the consumer are, and we are not tackling it. Probably it's more tricky to speak to our voters, politically more tricky, but I think that firstly we have to change the behavior of the people and then leave it to the market. So once people will not fill up their cars with gasoline or diesel, we will go bankrupt. And you don't need to penalize us or other businesses. So I think that the change of behavior is not taken into account. Yeah, so more issues than solutions from my side.
No, fair enough. Just coming back to, you said we're punishing the industry. I mean, we also heard that there is nonetheless an attempt also from the Parliament to broaden the climate narrative to, and I think in Brussels, the debate as a whole, so it's not just about emission reductions, it is about industrial transformation, societal transformation. Are you reassured to some extent, or are you optimistic at all? I mean, do you see a change in narrative that is more inclusive, and the European Union is going to be working on a new industrial strategy? I mean, do you see a shift that gives you cause for
but
optimism?
I mean, thinking that this is about the shift in industrial strategy, I miss, especially in this region, the shift in education. So what are we going to do? So we are industrialized countries. So I mean, we should tackle education first.
And who should do that? Where does
I mean, it should be done by governments, local governments. Mm-hmm. But being in European Parliament, this would be my card I would play, because I think this is the right thing.
Well, one of the elements, I don't think it's been further fleshed out, of the Green Deal is supposed to be a climate pact focused on behavioral change, bringing together industry, schools, all kinds of different parties. I don't think it's been further thought out. But maybe just to conclude before I move on.
I'd like to reflect on the penalizing part.
Go ahead.
Maybe we don't have to penalize anyone. Because I fully agree with you. I think this is a little bit more multi-dimensional topic. But if we talk about carbon-free future, I think none of us want to go back 100 years, no? Raise a hand if you really want to go back 100 years, but I don't believe you do. So what we need in this piece, because none of these policies and strategies comes into play unless there's an innovation and technology to make it happen. So what we need is innovation and technology, and we have wonderful technologies available already today. We have renewables, we have microgrids, we have high voltage DC to transfer electricity from North Sea to Bavaria. And I know exactly what you're thinking already. You're thinking, oh, big investment, we don't have money for that, who's going to finance that? But in this discussion, let's not forget what is the most efficient way to save electricity. It's not necessarily and only the new technologies, it's also to use the efficient, it's also electricity efficiency and energy efficiency. So use it more efficiently. It's like if you have a leakage in your pipe. Isn't it the fastest way to solve it, to put and fix the leak instead of the whole pipeline? And what I mean by that is that it's nice, and I'm an engineer, I love to talk about new technologies, but there are also existing technologies like electric motors. So where is the biggest leverage? 40% of the electricity is used by industry. Okay, so we are the bad guys. Maybe, I'm also part of the industry. But if you look at the industry, then 2/3 of your electricity is consumed by electrical motors. They are driving fans, they are driving conveyors, they are driving pumps. So, rough calculation, 1/3 of the electricity go into electrical motors. So what can we do? We can have more efficient motors, and we have them already. What we need in addition to all of these finances, we need regulation that we start using those most efficient motors. And by the way, by doing that, we actually support European industry because a lot of these efficient motors are European manufacturers. And by doing that, we start to create an impact today. In addition, only 20% of electrical motors is equipped by speed drive. With speed drive, relatively small investment, you can save electricity by 50%. If I look at, as a producer of speed drive, if I look at just the installed base of ABB, the amount of electricity saved is 515 terawatt hours with only our speed drives. That equals to 130 average households in EU. And if that power would have been produced by fossil energies, we already talk about savings that equals 100 million passenger cars. So there's a lot of things we can do relatively quickly. And yes, the speed drives and the motors, they all cost money. So what we can do here from the business point of view, we can also innovate in business model. And one of the things that we have started to do with our customers is that we have a business model where we say pay by savings. So actually pay for the equipment based on the savings that they create, the energy savings, because energy is also not free of charge. An interesting thing is that typically when you go into these projects, the return on investment is less than 2 years. So yes, we need all of this, but we also have to do and make sure that we invest in technology, but we have then rules and regulations in place to use that. That's the government role, but also then on the businesses, we need to innovate on the business models. So with that, the technologies are available today. They will not change the world overnight, but all of us here in the room can get started today.
So you would say do we have all or most of the technologies we need to achieve net zero emissions?
No, I don't say that, but we can get started. So I think what we need to understand is that we don't yet have all the elements in place, but if we just wait for the technologies to change the world and don't use what we have, then we are not improving the situation. I think to achieve that target is relatively complex, and we have to work in all fronts to get there. But we have to start acting now with the technologies that we have available today, and we will continue, industry will continue to innovate, so we will get there. 150 years, we needed to innovate in order to move. So what we innovated car from the horses, because that was the engineering challenge 150 years ago. Now we have a different engineering challenge, and I have a big faith of my profession. We will solve it, but let's not wait years to get solved it. Let's get started today.
Well, certainly the European Climate Foundation in Brussels did a study looking at net zero emissions and concluded we have 3/4 of the technologies we need. It's a question of deploying more of them.
Absolutely.
And the last quarter also exist, but are not yet commercially viable. So it fits very much with your
Exactly, and how do we also channel some of the funding to help the existing industries, like the transition of the industries, what Gabriel mentioned earlier, because I think this is also, we have to save the industry in Europe. We have to help them in this transition, because the worst thing that can happen is that we kill the industry in Europe, because then no one wins, really no one wins.
Are you, a change in business model, is that something you are exploring, see potential in? How, I guess, as you say, there are big challenges. So the question I was asking earlier is, what do you expect from a Green Deal, a European Green Deal? What can it do to help you? And what can you do on your side, as we just heard from ABB's side, to try and facilitate or to try and manage, survive, I don't want to say survive, but to try and make this work for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, discussing the ABB, we have several projects in the pipeline, which Tanya just mentioned. So, what do I expect? So, we take for granted that there is no oil business in the future. I think that we do not pay enough attention for the transition period and the world after there is no oil business in Europe, or there is no oil business in the world. So I think that we are not tackling these questions properly. Just imagine that those companies, or there are several countries where the major part of the GDP is based on petrodollars. Yeah? Middle East, Russia, South America, Nigeria, and other countries. In those countries, they are not able to assemble a simple car there. Once you cut back the basic income there, what kind of world do you imagine? And we are not taking this question into consideration. I think that in that terms we are rather short-sighted. So I would bring in more attention to education, then more attention to behavior change. I will pursue with behavior change. And what was not mentioned, that in case there is a positive practice how to tackle climate change, a positive business case, we should get some support to export it worldwide, to China, to Africa, South America, US.
Yeah.
So we should not concentrate on Europe itself. We are not alone here.
One follow-up, which is, okay, there's no oil perhaps in future, but the fuels industry, at least in Brussels, has already put out a 2050 vision talking about low-carbon liquid fuels, i.e. biofuels, I guess second generation, hydrogen, power to liquids. I mean, these are a new kind of oil, if you like.
Yeah. Heavily capital-intensive R&D behind them, and the business model is not there. Yeah, for example, the second generation of biofuel. Of course, we can build a plant 100 KTs production capacity for, I don't know, 250 million euros, but who will pay for that fuel? So I would, what I mentioned, I would change the behavior, and I told you yesterday that I imagine the world when you get on every bill you receive, every receipt, you see how much is the CO2 emission, and you pay for that. You get from hairdresser, you see that. You buy a steak, you see that. You fill up your car with diesel, you see that. You fill up your car with electricity, you see that. And to change the behavior in that way. Just for comparison, in US, there is the fuel consumption per capita is 2 times higher than in Europe. Why? Because the fuel there is pretty cheap. Okay. People do not pay for this emission burden.
Yes, this is one point, but I'd like to raise 2 different points. One is concerning industry and how enterprises can have benefits on this transition. And the point is to include innovation in enterprises and to integrate innovation in enterprises and industry. And for example, I was just checking the figures. Horizon Europe, after Horizon 2020, will contribute with 35% for climate. It means that this is one key point on innovation, is to generate new products, new approaches, new technologies that can help industry to be and to be more friendly on climate and to be more prepared for this transition. And I can agree with you then that we need to have an integrated strategy on education, on innovation, and how this can contribute to a new industry and a more clean industry. The second point is climate diplomacy. You raised some examples outside Europe, our trade relations with other countries outside Europe, and I think that Europe needs to improve climate diplomacy. And climate must be a stronger point on trade agreements with some, as we did with Canada or with Japan or with Korea. We need, the climate must be stronger on climate diplomacy. It means we need to develop a climate diplomacy, because we know very well that to achieve the result, the Paris Agreement, and to achieve a neutral carbon economy, we need to work together not only inside Europe, but also with other countries. And concerning the ETS, the carbon mechanism, the MFF has also a fund to support the development of this EU ETS mechanism.
Yeah, I think one of the questions there, a lot of the European money also for innovation has typically gone to Western Europe. How do we get more of it flowing, especially to these regions, which in a way need more support?
Yes, I can understand you, but I'm Portuguese.
Yeah, so you're doing okay.
No, no, my reaction is because when we start to speak with the Just Transition Fund, and during the hearing of Elisa Ferreira, the Portuguese candidate to become commissioner, the Portuguese commissioner, she was asked about this fund, this Just Transition Fund. And for me, it's clear that this Just Transition Fund must be a fund for all European Union. Mm-hmm. I can understand that there are different situations from one area to another area, but all the member states need to use this fund. And if this fund will be Just Transition Fund, will be financing by, as Johannes Hahn answered in his hearing, by cohesion money and member states' money, obviously it must be a fund for all European countries, respecting diversity, obviously, but for all European countries.
Yeah. We can follow. I just want to see if there are questions or points to make from anyone besides ourselves up here. Yeah, if you just tell us briefly who you are.
Very quickly, my name is Norbert Kurla, Environment State Secretary here in Slovakia. One reflection, what do you think maybe to the policymakers and also one to the industry, what is the ultimate goal to be climate neutral? Is it through emission reduction to be cost effective, or is it to have 100% of renewable energy? What's the climate neutrality in your view? And second, on a Just Transition Fund, I think it's a problem when we speak about new fund that should be made of cohesion policy, cohesion funding. We must talk beyond cohesion on that. So that's the first reflection. And second, do you think, and also that's for the industry, that this Just Transition Fund should have also dimension on industry? Because now we only talk about the energy, and especially coal regions in transition, wherever they are in Europe. For the economy like Slovakia, which we are industrial-based economy, second in the Europe in terms of GDP share of industrial production, and we are very strong advocate of industry to be part of this Just Transition Fund. So what's your view on that?
Okay. Is there anyone else with we can take one or two more and then we'll come back to our panel. Anyone else with yes, lady over there.
Livia Vašáková, European Commission representation here in Slovakia. I would have a question about nuclear, because it was not mentioned by any of the panelists, and anyhow it's very important here in the region. It is somehow tolerated, will it be supported, or how do you see it regarding the financings or the EIB, but also from the point of the European Parliament?
Okay. Yeah, we'll make that our final question for this round.
My name is Laudon. I'm from Austria. I will not refer to nuclear energy.
Thank you.
But I wanted to ask, we heard from Willy Molterer, so to say, that private capital will be needed very much to achieve all the projects which you have in mind in the future. What interests me is, when you look forward, is it more a lack of projects, or feasible projects, or doable projects, or is it more a lack of capital, or have you both in a balanced abundantly? Thank you.
And who was it to, your question? To. Okay, very good question. So the first one perhaps ties in a little bit with the nuclear question. Indeed, one of the roles of the EU is to give direction. Is it carbon neutral and we don't care how you get there? Or I guess that may be different for different countries, or some countries saying carbon neutral for us means 100% renewable, and we don't distinguish between those goals. And on just transition, indeed, a dimension, industrial dimension, energy-intensive industries, is that also valid? And finally, question on projects or capital. Who wants to kick off?
Well, thank you. Those are very relevant questions. I think I will start with the carbon neutrality. The objective is net carbon neutrality. So this does not mean that we will not have emissions, but the idea is to compensate those emissions so that by that date we can achieve the neutrality. And new technologies are being developed, and carbon storage, these type of technologies are even more and more important in compensating this. And of course, the energy sector is an important piece of the solution for carbon emissions, because they are the bulk of the emissions, but there are other sectors that are also emitters.
And just to say, so for the IB, the goal is not 100% renewables. It's net zero emissions.
Well, we have our criteria for the eligibility, and for energy projects is what we discussed before, that we have this policy of gradually phasing out energy projects dependent on fossil fuels when they don't meet our criteria of efficiency and sustainability that we have established, technical criteria in the level of emission of the projects in a transition. So we want certain technologies. We are not financing coal anymore since for many, many years. On nuclear is eligible in our policy. But I have to say that nuclear is very much contested by some member states, and in practice we don't support nuclear energy except for projects that concern increased security or this type of things, because this is something that we are a policy-driven institution, and for policy considerations, some of our member states do not want to support this type of projects. But from a technical point of view, nuclear is there. In the taxonomy that the Commission is now developing, nuclear will not be included as a sustainable activity because of other environmental considerations, but from a mitigation point of view, nuclear is a technology that it could be helpful. Now, on private capital needed, I think, of course, that when you see for the decarbonization of the economy and all the changes that will be needed, you need huge investments, and for that there is no public balance sheet that is able to cope with the level of investments. And I don't think either that this is only the role of the public sector. This is why the activities and the plans and initiatives that are now increasing all over the world to make finances more sustainable, like the greening the financial system, the Commission's action plan for sustainable finance, those are more and more important. And we will need private money. Capital markets can be a tool. Green bond markets, they have a big potential. At the EIB, we know that this market very well because we were the first issuer of a green bond in the market back in 2007. I think that there was this mention, are there enough projects? Of course, we know that in some cases the projects need to be developed because maybe even if they are there, you need to have technical support or a specific financial structure of the project to make it marketable. And this is something that we also do. We provide advisory services, and this is something that we are aware that will need to increase in order to develop the type of projects and help in the decarbonization. But something that it is also very important is the the instruments to mitigate risk, especially in those innovations that and new technologies, because sometimes those are unproven technologies, and in the market it would be very difficult to finance them, and some instruments have been mentioned. I have to say that those instruments will be very important for this region, especially, for example, the Modernization Fund, which is 7 billion euros specifically for the 10 newest member states, and the EIB is going to be play a key role in supporting, advising, and mobilizing those two funds, the Modernization and Innovation Fund.
A quick sentence on the concept of, you also spoke about spending more money on just transition. Does that also include energy-intensive industry, or that's focused on coal, moving out of coal, or your concept is?
Well, our role as a bank is already in a way linked to a just transition, because
no, but the concept, it's broader than just about, it's more than just coal, it's about industry.
Well, we are waiting because the Commission is defining the instrument, instrument. But we, for example, in our energy lending policy, in order to help for the energy transition, we have that for the 10 member states that are benefiting from the Modernization Fund, we will allow to finance 75% of the project, something that we normally do not do. We go up to 50% because we want to crowd in other investors. Here we will go beyond to help them in the transition. So we might develop other mechanisms to help in this transition, and not only for coal regions, but with a focus on jobs and the impact. But just a quick mention, I think that it is very important that we see this transition that I think that is happening, and from a political point of view, the commitment is almost there, and 24 countries already, or 25 have already committed to that. I think that we need to see this not only as a challenge, but also as an opportunity. 4 million jobs have been created in Europe in this new space of green jobs. And I think that something that would be very important for the industry is to be able to adapt to the changes that are coming, and not take advantage of the support that could be provided.
You posed the question, carbon neutrality, yes or no? I would pose the question a little bit different, because I think, or net neutrality, or reducing emissions, how we ever pose it, because I think we all know the answer. We must do something. The more relevant question in my mind is how. And what I'd like it not to be is carbon neutrality at all cost. So we need to understand how. And there's a lot of talks about also, that I think we in the panel has not talked about that much about transportation and sustainable transportation. There is a lot of talks about electromobility, and that tends to be very much centered on the passenger cars, and then we debate the fast charging or slow charging, cars or no cars, and it needs all of that. But e-mobility must go way beyond that, because battery cars won't solve the whole issues. We need buses, we need fuel cells, we need electric trains, we need electric vessels. Then we need to have more digital systems and more artificial intelligence, how we, for example, drive these marine vessels, because if you start to look at algorithms and you start to look at how the waves are going, winds are going, you can actually save 20 to 30% of the fuels. So again, it's a lot of innovation, and I think I'd like the discussion to be more how, and understanding the consequences. And coming back to my topic about e-mobility, if the cars are charged with coal-powered electricity, then we again save not so much. So I think we need to understand the interdependencies that we have, and start asking the question how, and how do we perceive the industry in Europe? Is there a ways to do that we do it in the same way? So that, from my perspective, is something that we need to see it as a little bit more complex question than yes or no, because we all know yes. Then the question is, how do we do it? And I hope it to not be at all cost.
Okay, yeah. I think that's clear. We're coming up, I know we started a bit late, but we're already at 12:15. Are there any other pressing questions? We'll take just that one, and then I'll come to our final two speakers to wrap up.
Hi, my name is Tomáš Meravý. I'm a former member of GlobSec, and I'm currently working for the new political party, Zalogy, which is headed by Mr. Andrej Kiska, the former president. I'm missing one vital ingredient in the debate, because the European Union has been decreasing its CO2 emissions for decades now, but global CO2 emissions are on the rise. And the largest contributor currently to CO2 emissions globally is China. Where is the kind of, you mentioned the need for a carbon diplomacy, and I think it's today we are already 5 minutes after 12, so this I think should be the most important component now, because if China and other major polluters go on, we will not solve the problem. There is of course the Paris Climate Agreement, which China has signed, but it is only very soft. It only has very soft targets for China. So by the time 2030, where they are expected to change their policy, they will continue to grow, they will become more powerful, their leverage will increase. How are we going to put pressure on China?
I'd like to come to you last. I'll just give you a chance because we're going to have to wrap
up. To anybody who can answer this question.
Yeah, I fully agree. So China accounts for 50% of the total CO2 emission worldwide. So I fully agree what you said. This climate diplomacy is one. Probably that's what I mentioned, that exporting the best know-how and the best practice overseas, all the positive business cases. But just reacting to the Austrian colleagues, he asked whether lack of capital, lack of projects. So what I see that all the companies are sitting on plenty of cash. All the big tech companies, they are sitting on plenty of cash. So I think this is not the question of missing the capital, this is missing the economic projects. So we have plenty of ideas how the world will look like, and we have imagination about within the mobility, artificial intelligence and others, but still the business case is missing. Yeah. So for that reason, people, even citizens of the European Union, they do not know where to put their money. There are no sexy projects at all.
Okay, you've got a couple of questions too.
Okay, my reaction is, I think that first of all we need to put together transition and negotiation. Transition and phasing out. It means to assure the transition and to achieve the goals, including the United Nations goals and Paris goals, we need to have a clear roadmap for transition and for phasing out concerning situations that are more difficult on climate goals. This is the first point. The second point is negotiations. We need to negotiate with employers, with trade unions, because this is, to achieve these goals, there will be a big impact on the enterprises, so I think that we need to negotiate. To answer to your question, yes, climate diplomacy. I think that climate diplomacy must be a pillar of the European diplomacy. But European Union nowadays have a very important instrument with China, because during the last summit, European Union-China summit, first of all, the summit had conclusions, what did not happen in the previous summit, and they decided together to negotiate investment agreement, European Union, China. And in the framework of this agreement, of this investment agreement, climate must be a key point. So sometimes I fully agree with you, with your assessment on the position of China and how to dialogue with China. But European Union has some instruments to use to achieve these goals. And this agreement on investment is a good agreement to discuss climate.
Just a quick 3 clarifications for the European Parliament. does climate neutrality mean 100% renewables? Yes or no?
It's a mix. I can't answer in the framework of the Parliament, but clearly it's a mix. I can support your assessment, your answer.
Okay, and on nuclear, I know it's currently out of the taxonomy. Is the Parliament likely to revisit its position on that?
Parliament has not a common position. I can speak about, including inside my political family, I imagine that I can't give a common position.
Okay, and finally on industrial just transition, for the Parliament, is that about more than helping coal regions, and also is it about broader help to other industries, carbon-intensive industries?
No,
I'm thinking manufacturing, steel, cement, kind of.
I think that on Just Transition Fund, first of all, I don't agree that it will be financed by cohesion and member states only. So this was the answer of Johan's Ann, but it's not our position. We say new projects, new money. So this is our point. Concerning transition is also transition climate and transition energy. I think that we need to define these concepts, but we need also to move to a new generation of cohesion policies. This is the point. And we know that we start from different positions, starting from different regions, different areas in the European Union.
Okay, thank you. I think what I take away is the Green New Deal. Nobody knows exactly what it is yet. Nobody in Brussels knows, so so that remains to be seen. But in any case, I've been in Brussels for over 10 years now, and I would say the debate on climate has certainly evolved from being a discussion over emission reduction targets, an extra 1% or not. We still talk about that, but there is a new dimension of thinking about jobs, a social dimension, which has been forced onto the agenda by broader politics. Industry, industrial transformation, that didn't exist 10 years ago at the time of the first climate and energy package. So now it's about doing something that makes sense from a climate perspective, but is also politically acceptable and socially and economically interesting. And I think that has to work indeed for all of Europe. And on the funding question, it's I guess we probably cannot reduce also the concept of solidarity to a single fund. The Just Transition Fund is not going to solve the problem, but when it comes to things like innovation funding, most of that money goes to Western Europe. So right across the board, there will have to be, Europe's not going to deliver if not every bit of it delivers. That's repeating what Mr. Tusk said yesterday. So that's, yeah, it's not going to be easy. That's my takeaway. We're out of time, so a big round of applause to our panel and to yourselves.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.